All right, shalom, shalom. Welcome back to the channel. I'm the code searcher, Jonathan, and in this video, I want you to go on a journey with me. Okay, not a literal geographical journey, but a journey nonetheless through ancient documents and the Bible and even the Talmud. And the reason I want to do this with you is in lieu, really, I got inspired. I'd already been thinking about doing this for a while because I thought there was credibility here. But I've found a way to make this a teaching opportunity in lieu of what we've seen with Billy Carson and some of the things that people were taking just for face value, right? We all saw the debacle with Billy, and he was exposed as a fraud, and really didn't know what he was talking about. And the point, kind of the point of this teaching is to show you that all that was not necessary. That anybody has access to the internet. You could have done your own research and really figured out that what you were hearing was not really accurate, right? And a good example of that is the Sinaiticus Bible, where anybody could have gone and looked, and I'm sure many people did. This is why there were so many apologetics that were after him, that anybody could have gone and looked and verified this. So for this particular um, experiment, I want to take you on a little investigative journey with me and show you throughout this whole presentation. It's probably going to be a couple of different parts. You guys, we're going to break this up in a couple of parts because we're going to be examining several different ancient letters. Okay. And we're going to be determining through a process of discernment, of logic and reason, but also some simple methodology to determine whether we are reading something that has any credibility or if it's just a bunch of bull. Okay. And so I think this will sharpen you. Iron sharpens iron, right? I think this will sharpen you, but it'll also help you, develop some skills when you're being a good Berean and you're going and researching something, whether it's in the Bible internally or just something outside the Bible, you can apply these kind of these steps and methodology. And what I want to talk to you about is something that has controversy. It does have controversy. However, that controversy is not has any kind of consensus either way. And a reason for that is because we're not talking about something that is considered scripture or a religious document. Okay, we are talking about ancient documents. And some of it is religious because we're going to be talking about the Talmud, but in particular, letters from one person to another person is not considered religious documents unless we're talking about Paul and Timothy and things like that, and that's a different kind. That's considered a religious letter. Um, the letters I want to talk to you about is the letters or the reports from Gamaliel, from Caiaphas, but also from Pilate in the case of Yeshua. Now, this is what's called the Archko Volume. Now, you may have heard of it and you've already kind of poo-pooed and walked away from it. So just pump your brakes a little bit and let's talk about this because I want to show you a new way of looking at this in a forensic sort of way. Can we test? We're supposed to test all things. Can we test the legitimacy of these documents? And I want to show you that we can. And this is what I mean by that. Okay, so we have examples of alterations in a text or outright forgeries or something like that where sometimes scholars have to determine and they have to use methodology just like you saw with Wes Huff and he was challenging the gospel of Barnabas. There are times where you use a methodology to determine whether what you are reading is legitimate or is just a bunch of crap. Okay, and some of those things would be like internal proofs or external proofs that either go toward validating or invalidating whatever you're researching there. Does that make sense? So there's methodology there in searching something out. So for the case of Barnabas and how it was determined by most scholars that had a running knowledge of the geographical locations in question, because in the Gospel of Barnabas, as an example, the writer writes about something that he doesn't know about. He has a general knowledge, but he doesn't have a physical knowledge. In other words, he's never been to the locations that he's talking about. And I wish Wes would have expanded a little more on this point in the debate with Billy, but it is physically impossible for Yeshua to have walked to Sinai in just a couple of days. It is, whether you go into Egypt, the Sinai that's supposed to be in Egypt, or the real one that's in Saudi Arabia, it is more than a week's journey. And in neither case do you cross over the Jordan and as described in Barnabas. Another one he brought up. Now that's an internal proof. That's an internal proof that we can prove or disprove, right? Because anybody who has been there could tell you that that's not the case. So they would automatically know that whoever wrote this is not telling the truth. But there are other things that are on top of that. For instance, Wes brought out the point that Dante's Inferno is paraphrased in that, and that is clearly there. He can show you that as a scholar, and this is one of the reasons that scholars disproved this book. And we could go on and on. So, but basically, the writer had no idea what he was talking about. And let me give you an analogy of what this would be the equivalent of. Let's say, I mean, everyone watching this has a running knowledge, and maybe even an intimate knowledge of the McDonald's hamburger experience is, right? Everybody's been into a McDonald's, right? You've seen the Golden Arches, you've had a Big Mac, you've had, whatever. You've had that experience. But let's say that someone writes a blog, and we're going to fast forward 200 years into the future, but someone writes a blog about their first McDonald's experience. And in that writing, they say something like, when I first showed up to the Golden Arches, I was surprised to see that there were truly 24-karat golden arches there. And when I walked through the door, there were beautiful, lush red carpets and leather seating everywhere. And there were waiters and waitresses and, all this stuff that really don't fit the experience of what it's like to go to McDonald's. And I know this might sound silly, but it's just an analogy, you guys. And let's say this is a historical record that people in the future are trying to determine is true. Well, they can search. Let's say the internet exists, and they can search the internet and go and see what it's like for a McDonald's experience, and they could see, well, actually, there's not golden arches. They're just what people call golden arches, right? The yellow M. Now, this forged writer who is making the story up is talking about literally golden arches, right? But the real experience, because the reader can research that and see that historically that is not the case. There's no red carpet. There are no waiters there. All the information given by this person who has written about this experience is clearly not telling the truth, because they clearly not have ever been to a McDonald's. Now, does that make sense? Right? So, and I apologize for it being silly, but in quick thinking, I'm trying to think of something I can relate this in such a way of how we can determine whether something is true or whether something's just absurd, right? Now, another example Billy had produced, which is this parchment that was later determined to be a fraud, because they could see that the text had actually been copied from a known text that was only existed on an online version, right? And so they were, even though the parchment radio dated to the 4th century, they knew that there was a forge involved because the text didn't have the characteristics that you would expect. It actually had fundamental mistakes that should not be there, right? And throws a red flag, right? So in the methodology, it has to have the appearance of being legit. With a forgery, or somebody is trying to forge something, normally you would see where someone is trying to add to the story. Let's say, the story of Yeshua and Yeshua having a wife. A forger is going to produce information that some is consistent with the story of Yeshua, but then they add this other detail, right? They're embellishing, they're adding to the story for whatever reason, right? But we can see in the actual history that there's some things that don't jive there. And this is why some books don't get added to the canon. And I know some people think there's a great conspiracy, but there's a legitimate and logical reason why men from old didn't add them in the Bible, because there's clearly discrepancies there. A good example is the book of Jubilees, where modern scholars today will tell you there are 29 contradictions in the book of Jubilees. That's a whole nother teaching. The point of that is most scholars will not pull doctrine from a book that has that kind of discrepancies, right? It's not valid. In other words, it has an interloper, in other words, in it. So, but these letters, okay, and I'm going to give you the backstory of it. This, by the way, this is all the preface before we actually get into the letters. I have to give you the backstory and some of the controversy with these letters. But we're going to be talking about some letters from Gamaliel, from Caiaphas, but also from Pilate. Now, I will say the only detractor, the only person since these papers were allegedly, and we're going to start from there. If this is going to be an investigation, we're going to start from the allegedly position, because we're trying to determine whether this is true or false, right? So allegedly, these documents come from archives from Constantinople, but also from Rome and the Vatican. And in the 1850s, two men got together, and I'm summarizing here. They start telling stories to each other of talking about the Bible, and one man has actually been to Europe and has seen some documents, particularly a document about Pilate's testimony to Caesar about the trial and crucifixion of Yeshua. And he had been telling this story around America and even producing pamphlets by the time he met this second gentleman who, when they got together, they hatched a plan that it was important that they try to gather more documents to examine it. They just had a fascination. I would have too, by the way, if I had lived in that time, I would have definitely been very fascinated with this story. So let me start here, you guys, and show you. Now, again, this is not without controversy, but that's kind of the whole point of this exercise. We're trying to determine whether we can disprove or prove that this is a factual thing. Now, I'll go back to the only person that had a problem with this came about in 1950. His name was Goodspeed, who was a theologian, and he was the only one who has basically, attacked this and tried to debunk it, right? But after, going through what he, his evidence, in my opinion, you guys, I'm not convinced that he debunked it. Some of his points are very weak, like the time period where these guys go, or this guy goes to Europe. Goodspeed goes back to a man's hometown, or Wyman's hometown, I think it is, and confirms that he was gone in the period that he said he was gone. And he found a neighbor or somebody that said he thought he remembered that this man had been gone for a couple of months, right? And so he bases his debunking on the fact that he can't place the man in Europe and in Constantinople and in Rome in a 2-month period, because at that time travel was with sailboats, and you couldn't travel that fast, right? It took weeks to get to the Mediterranean alone, right? So, but then to be able to go and research these documents and yada yada yada, and get to the point where you can come back and you're actually producing something in a book, it would have taken time. And so he was challenging that based on one man's testimony. And by the way, I think it's weak, because how do we know that the guy testifying was accurate. I can recall times where I've seen a loved one, and then there's a period where I don't see them, and it feels like it's only a few months, and in reality, it's been more than a year, maybe, right? And the next time you see them, you'd be like, "Hey, I just saw you a couple of months ago," and it's like, "No, it was a year ago," right? How many have that happen? You can lose track of time very easily. So it's very plausible that this so-called witness that said, "Yeah, he was gone for a 2-month period," is mistaken. So I'm not convinced. And then the other things also that the only document he attacks is the Latin translation of um, Pilate's testimony. He does not attack Gamliel's. Why? Well, I'm going to show you here. You see what it actually says. It says the Archko Volume, or the archaeological writings of the Sanhedrin and the Talmud of the Jews. And the reason for that is because for the most, this would have been Hebrew documents, for the exception of like Constantine's letter in regard to having 50 copies of the scriptures written and bound, which would have come in, after 325, and would be, um, something that was Roman. It would have probably been in Latin, okay? But the Talmud and Jonathan's interview with, and Gamaliel and the report of Caiaphas, all this would have been, it's possible it was in Latin, and I'm sure that it was copies in Latin, but the original language would have been Hebrew, right? And we can find those today, by the way. This is the Talmud, the Sanhedrin and the Talmud. The Sanhedrin is the men, there was 70 men from the Bible times in the time of Yeshua, who were kind of the religious rulers, okay? But they also have a volume of the Talmud called the Sanhedrin, and you're going to see reference of this in these documents, okay, where the author gives you the reference of where it came from. So you can actually go and look at Sanhedrin so-and-so, X or B and so-and-so. I don't really understand the reference system. I do have an Orthodox, or excuse me, he's now a conservative rabbi who does understand the Talmud and the reference system that I can possibly draw on to get, some references here. All right, so we are starting this from the premise that we're trying to determine whether this is legit or not. Okay, so. And by the way, I've already done this, but I'm for the sake of uh, learning something, we're doing this from scratch, right? Now, we're not going to start from the beginning because the documents are how they were discovered. You can go and read that for yourself, right? We don't need to review that in this. I want to get right to the meat and potatoes, so to speak. Not saying that this is not important, but that would take another video alone just to go through the 50 pages of how all these were discovered. Now, you take your time, and that would be a good project for you. You take the time and the diligence to go and do that yourself. Okay, so we're gonna start from the premise that we are thinking of these men as honorable men. There's no motive and there's no reason that we would think that they're deceiving, but we're testing what they're saying because it is a testimony, right? Because this is the only reference we have, by the way. We don't have access to the documents that they say that they had access to in the Vatican, but we can assume that they do exist, right? Otherwise, why tell this story? And by the way, the conclusion of all this, and they even say themselves that the information that they bring forth doesn't really disprove or add to the story at all. If anything, it just corroborates. My question would be, if this is a hoax and someone's trying to pull one over, maybe to sell books, why would it just be to corroborate? When in most cases you see that there is a clear deception there where they're trying to insert something new and maybe sensational, like Yeshua had a wife, right? And the motive to sell books, or to maybe they want to disprove or discredit Yeshua and his purity, right? Who knows? It's just an example, right? But I don't believe the two men involved in this contrived this story just to deceive people and just to sell books, especially in that time, which, this whole story starts in the 1850s when they first meet. And from the 1850s to the 1880s is when they developed and finally got something in copy. And you can see this copy that we're looking at is from 1913, so well over 100 years. But this, like I said, this goes back to the 1850s. All right. So the very first thing we're going to read is Gamaliel's interview with Joseph of Mary. We may come back to Constantine's letter or even talk about the short sketch of the Talmuds. But basically, to summarize, they talk about some of the documents that they look at. And by the way, those documents still exist today. It's called the Talmud. And in Constantinople, which in that time was not called Constantinople, I don't believe. I'm talking about in the time of Yeshua. In the time of Yeshua and on through Paul, it's called Ephesus. But um, anyway, it's known as Ephesus. Anyway, we know that there's synagogues there because Paul went there, and the Hebrews and the Jews, they were all in this region. So the fact that this letter that Gamaliel writes, and what it is Gamaliel was sent to investigate the story of Yeshua. Okay. And which makes sense and does fall into, what the Talmud says, that there was an investigation into whether this child, which kind of baffled everyone at 12 years old, he was in the Torah quoting the scriptures without even seeing the scrolls. And so there were some rabbis there going, wait a minute, who's this little kid? And they would be like, oh, yeah, this is the one that was born with the star and Herod and killing the babies. You remember? This is the one, right? Well, he's back from Egypt at that point, from 12 years old, right? Because we can see in the scripture at 12 years old, he's coming and he's teaching in the temple. And so some of these Pharisees were baffled. Well, the story is officially from the Talmud that Gamaliel was sent to do an interview. All the witnesses and everybody in Nazareth and Bethany and everywhere that Yeshua lived on the person Yeshua, right? So this fits historically, and you're going to see in a cohesive way. It doesn't add to the story in the sense that it's embellishing anything and bringing anything new. What it does bring is it brings a perspective from eyewitnesses, and that's what we want to see, guys. We want to see eyewitness account and compare it with other eyewitness accounts, which would be from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and even in Acts. And if we can compare these and even use the testimonies in the Talmud, by the way, you guys, in the Talmud is clearly many references to Yeshua. And I just want to show you this just really quick. Now, if you go and you try to search this under the name Jesus in a Talmudic resource, guess what? You're not going to find anything. But if you put in Yeshu Hanatsri, which is what the Jews would have called him, translated Jesus of Nazareth. Sorry, still learning this new. I'm not even sure if you guys can see that. Anyway, Yeshua in the Talmud, there are several places where Yeshua is mentioned, and you guys, I'm gonna do another presentation on this when I get with my rabbi friend and I can pull everything from the Talmud, from the time of Yeshua, every reference, the good and the bad, but also the testimony, because in the Talmud, it's not just teachings, you guys. There's historical reference, there's writings, there's even, like in the Sanhedrin, letters that were exchanged, right? And so it's indisputable, and that's why I believe it's worth looking at to determine, can we trust it? Okay, so we're talking about Gamaliel. Anybody, you guys know who Gamaliel is? This is our first witness, by the way, that I'm choosing. Gamaliel, just to review, He's mentioned a few times in the scriptures, but he was part of the Sanhedrin. He was one of the elders of the Sanhedrin, and he was considered a wise teacher. Paul sat at the foot of Gamaliel. We see that it's acknowledged in the book of Acts, but also historically, the man is well known. He's even revered today by Orthodox Judaism, you guys. So this man is still today considered a wise sage. But here's the unique thing about Gamaliel. Gamaliel did not have let's just say this. He was more neutral when it came to Yeshua. He was not one of the Sanhedrin or that came against Yeshua. We can see in the New Testament that we see Nicodemus, who was a part of that, also Joseph Arimathea, who had favorable or were favorable to Yeshua. Well, technically, so was Gamaliel. He was as well. You can see that in a letter in his testimony and his report to the Sanhedrin, because they sent him to go and see if this was going to be the Messiah, right? And bring back the report. And based on that report, you can see responses from other Sanhedrin and even through history where other rabbis have commented on it, where they had a disparaging look of Mary and called her horrible things. And even, there's stories of Yeshua who they claim was a heretic and he's in hell boiling in feces and all that. It's all there. All right. But you can also see the dialogue back and forth at the time. And it's known that Gamaliel was very tolerant of Yeshua, even his disciples, and probably was secretively an ally. And even in this Wikipedia, report on it, we can see that there's even, well, let's just read it. You'll see at the bottom here. Gamaliel the elder, also spelled Gamaliel or Rabban Gamaliel, was a leading authority in the Sanhedrin in the early first century. He was a son of Simon ben Hillel and the grandson of the great Jewish teacher Hillel the elder. He fathered Simeon ben Gamaliel, who was named for Gamaliel's father, and a daughter who had married the priest named Simon ben Nathaniel. In the Christian tradition, Gamaliel is recognized as a Pharisaic doctor of the Jewish law. Gamaliel was named as a member of the Sanhedrin in the 5th chapter of Acts and the teacher of Paul the Apostle in Acts 22:3. Gamaliel encouraged his fellow Pharisees to show leniency to the apostles of Yeshua. And in Acts 5:34, and that's in Acts 5:34. Now, the Jewish tradition. In the Talmud, Gamaliel is described as bearing the titles of Nasi and Rabban, which is, our master, or prince and our master. As the president of the great Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, it is not doubted that he held a senior position in the highest court in Jerusalem. Gamaliel holds the reputation in the Mishnah, right? Mishnah is one of the books in the Talmud. You have the Mishnah, the Chumash, the Tanya, and all these other books, the Sanhedrin, in this huge volume of what is called the Talmud. Okay, excuse me. Gamaliel holds a reputation in the Mishnah for being one of the greatest teachers in the annals of Judaism. Since Rabban Gamaliel, the elder, died, there has been no more reverence for the law, and purity and piety died out of the same time. Right? This is their current view of him. Gamaliel's authority on questions of religious law is suggested by two Mishnaic antecedents, in which the king and queen asked for his advice and rituals. The identity of the king and queen in question is not given, but is generally thought to either be Herod Agrippa and his wife Cypros the Nabatean, Herod Agrippa II, and his sister Bernice. As rabbinic literature always contrasts the school of Hillel the elder, that of the Shammai, and only present the collective opinions of each of these opposing schools of thought without mentioning the individual nuances and views of the rabbis within them. These texts do not portray Gamaliel as being knowledgeable about the Jewish scriptures, nor did they describe him as a teacher. For this reason, Gamaliel is not listed as part of the chain of individuals who perpetuated the Mishnaic tradition. Instead, the chain is listed as passing directly from Hillel to Yohanan ben Zakkai. Nevertheless, the Mishnah mentions Gamaliel's authorship of a few laws about community, welfare, and conjugal rights. He argued that the law should protect women during divorce, and that for the purpose of remarriage, a single witness was sufficient evidence for the death of her husband. Various pieces of the classical rabbinic literature additionally mention that Gamaliel sent out 3 epistles designed as notifications of religious rulings, and which portray Gamaliel as the head of the Jewish body for religious law. 2 of these 3 were sent respectively to the inhabitants of Galilee and the Darom, southern Judea, and were on the subject of first tithe, and the 3rd epistle was sent to the Jews of the diaspora that argued for the introduction of the intercalendary month. So Gamaliel, who was related to Hillel, was also involved in the changing of the calendar, which, by the way, did not change until the time of Constantine. All right. So what calendar they were on that's another teaching. Since the Hillelian school of thought is presented collectively, very few other teachings are clearly identified as Gamaliel's. There is only a cryptic dictum comparing his students to classes of fish, a ritually impure fish, which is memorized everything by the study, but has no understanding, is the son of poor parents. I want to get down to here. And the Acts of the Apostles introduced Gamaliel as a Pharisee and celebrated doctor of the Mosaic Law, Acts 5:34. In a larger context, verse 17 and 42, Peter and the other apostles are described as being persecuted before the Sanhedrin before continuing to preach the gospel despite the Jewish authorities having previously prohibited. The passage describes Gamaliel as presenting an argument against executing the apostles. So he was arguing for the apostles. He was against, again, he was very moderate, maybe even favorable to Yeshua. And in this case, after Yeshua's, been killed and resurrected, you see him against the execution of the apostles, reminding them about the previous revolts of Thaddeus and Judas of Galilee, which had collapsed rather quickly after the deaths of those individuals. Gamaliel's advice was accepted after his concluding argument. And this is what he says: "Now I say unto you, refrain from these men and let them alone. For if this counsel is to be the work of men, then it will come to naught. But if it be from God, ye cannot overthrow it, lest happily ye be found even to fight against God." So he was telling them, don't touch this. Let's see if this is God or not, right? So Gamaliel was very hesitant to convict even Yeshua, but also the disciples, okay? The book of Acts later going to describe Paul the Apostle, recounting that though born in a Tarsus, he was brought up in Jerusalem at the feet of Gamaliel and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of his fathers. No details are given about which teaching Paul adopted from Gamaliel. It is presumed that as a Pharisee, Paul was already recognized in the community at this time as a devout Jew. Also, how much Gamaliel influenced aspects of Christianity is unmentioned. However, there is no other record of Gamaliel ever having taught in public. But the Talmud does describe Gamaliel as teaching a student who displayed impotence in learning, which few other scholars identify as possible references to Paul. The relationship of Paul the Apostle and Judaism continues to be a subject of scholarly debate. Professor All right, so this guy right here has an argument that if Paul was really anyway, he goes into a rant about the murderous rage against Christians. Paul, in his conversion, how it differed from Gamaliel. I don't agree with his assessment there. The Gospel of Gamaliel, which is not what we're going to be reading. This is something completely different right here, okay? Is a hypothetical book speculated to exist by some scholars. perhaps part of the Pilate Apocrypha. Um, while no ancient sources directly refer to such a gospel, um, first proposed as such a book existed in 1906. Scholars who believe such a book existed have reconstructed it from a homily of the Lament of Mary by a bishop named Cyriacus. Cyriacus believed Laham Miriam extensively quotes from the Gospel of Gamaliel. The lament includes a section that leads with I Gamaliel, which have speculation in these sections. We're actually quoting an existing gospel. Other scholars believe such interference that the author was plagiarizing a lost gospel is unwarranted. So this, this also, you can see with this particular book that there was people accusing of plagiarism, and the same would be said about these letters, that one could say that somebody read the Bible and they plagiarized the story and come up with their own storyline and narrative with these, and that is what we're going to test here to see if that is true. Because if it's one or two people doing this, they have to write from the perspective of a handful of people, and we're going to look and see if the style is all the same, if the way they use words, right, and see if there's any inter or external proofs that we can discover to either prove this or disprove what we're reading, right? So again, there is some claim against it that this is not legit, but again, it's one theologian in 1950 that produced a book claiming that physically it was impossible for the author that said he did this and he did that to do that, and he didn't have enough time to do it. That's debatable, right? And again, there's probably flaws to the testimonies there. So we're going on the premise that the authors of the book, and I'm not talking about of these documents, I'm talking about the men. There's two men that put this book together called the Archko Volume, and I'll make sure you guys have a link where you can go and look at this. But you can see there, he goes into the story of how these records were discovered, right? Tells the story. Now you can go on and read how that was. We're not going to do that, but some of the things we're going to look at is this one right here. This one is the one that the only person in history to come along and say this whole thing is fake. This was what he had a problem with. There's other resources that validate this, especially this right here, these notes on it, or what Pilate says, because it's two different people. It goes to prove it. All right. Then there's also the Herod defense before the Roman Senate in regard to his conduct in Bethlehem, and then defense before the Roman Senate in regard to the execution of John the Baptist. We will look at these at a later time, but I want to start with Gamaliel. We're going to start there. The interview with Joseph and Mary, and it kind of fits into the season that we're in, even though I don't believe that Yeshua was born in December. People are commemorating that time to the birth of Yeshua. Here's what's interesting about these documents. It actually has the exact date, because it's mentioned in the text or in the document, the exact date that Yeshua was born and the exact day that he died. Interesting, because we can compare that to what we know, or what we can figure out from modern day technology. So let's go to 79. It's 82. So, ooh, look at that. Fell right on it. That's pretty good. Gamaliel's interview with Joseph and Mary and some others concerning Yeshua. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, guys. Sorry I had to go through that whole thing about, setting this up, but I wanted to get you to this point so we can get to the meat and potatoes, because this is really interesting to me. And what we're looking at is Gamliel's words. This is not Pilate's words, which was what was contested. This is Gamliel's words, and you can find this in the Sanhedrin um, papers that are part of the Talmud. You know what I just realized? Before we do that, we need to review of the Bible first. Matthew 1. Let's go there. Because we won't have any context. Well, some people won't have any context of why this letter is important and what it has any value to. Now, in Matthew 1, we can see an account from Matthew, and this was probably told to Matthew. Matthew wasn't at the birth of Yeshua, obviously, but he was very close to Mary. And so Mary was probably the source of where this story came from, because everybody would have known, how Yeshua came on the scene. Okay. Now it says, now the birth of Yeshua was on this wise, when his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph. Before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. And then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not willing to make her public example, meaning he didn't want to, because she would be stoned if he went and told the rabbis that she was already pregnant, was minded to put her away privately. But while he thought on these things, behold, an angel of Yah appeared unto him in a dream, saying, Joseph, thou son of David, fear not to take thee Mary, thy wife, for that which she's conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Yeshua, for he shall save his people from their sins. Now all this was done that it might be fulfilled that which was spoken of Yah by the prophet, saying, behold, a virgin shall be with child. And this is Isaiah speaking, right? Isaiah right here. And shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with, or El with us, which being interpreted is God with us. And Joseph, being raised from sleep, did as the angel of Yah had bidden him. And look what it says, being raised from his sleep, meaning he was dreaming this. Did as the angel of Yah had bidden him, and took unto him his wife, and he knew her not till she had brought forth her firstborn son. And what it means was he had not he had not seen her naked until she had been brought forth her firstborn son, and he called his name Yeshua. Now let's go to Luke, and this is another account, right? Tells it a little differently. In 6 months, this is another account. This is going to be also from another perspective. I think this is Joseph, maybe. And in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by Yah unto the city of Galilee, named Nazareth, to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph, and the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And the angel came unto her and said, Hail, thou art highly favored, and Yah is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. And when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying, and cast her mind that manner of salutation this would be. And the angel said unto her, Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with Yah. And behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb and bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Yeshua. He shall be great, and he shall be called the Son of the Highest, and the Adonai Elohim shall give unto him the throne of his father David, and he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom, and there shall be no end. And said Mary unto the angel, How shall this be, seeing I know not a man? And the angel said unto her, The Holy Spirit shall come upon thee, and the power of the highest shall overshadow thee. Therefore also the holy thing which shall be born of thee shall be called the Son of God. And behold, thy cousin Elizabeth, she hath also conceived a son in her old age, and this in her 6th month with her. So she's 6 months ahead of Mary, and her who was called barren. So she was, she was older and wasn't able to have a kid, and now she is. For with Elohim nothing shall be impossible. And Mary said, Behold, the handmaid of Yah, be unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. Right. So we got two accounts told from different perspective. I think the writer of each one of these is getting the story from, and tell me about how did it all happen, right? And they're getting the information and putting it together, right? This is very much like if there was a hit and run, let's say hypothetically there was a hit and run, and you got 5 witnesses, and let's say we're the responding police officers on the scene. We didn't see what was happening, but we're trying to ascertain what happened, right? Now, we can't expect each of these witnesses to have the same exact story, right? There might be some things that are the same all the way through, but if they're telling everything verbatim, that's not normally what happens in a situation where people are recounting things, unless there's some sort of something funny going on, right? Normally, a police officer would note and to expect that there's going to be slight variances between the different perspectives, right? For instance, first eyewitness to this event, right, where a red car hits a man on a bicycle, and and then takes off. And the first witness says, I saw a red car hit a man on a bicycle, and he got out and he kicked the man and then fled. Witness number 2 said, I saw a red vehicle. Notice the slight change. He doesn't say car, he just says red vehicle. Hit a man on a bicycle, and he got out and he kicked the man, and the man said, Why are you kicking me? And then the other man fled, right? So that's witness 2. And then witness 3 says, I saw a car hit a man on a bike and got out of his car and beat the man. And while beating the victim, he begged him to stop, saying, Stop, why are you beating me? And then he got in his car and he fled away. Now, right off the bat, with these 3 different witnesses, we can see that there's a common theme going on there, right? And some facts that we can ascertain from this, especially from witness 1 and witness 2, that this was a red car, okay? And a bicycle involved, and a man on the bicycle was hit. This is all common facts that are common all the way through. Witness 4 said, I saw a man in a red car with brown hair. He's got an additional detail here, right? But does it disprove the common, theme of what's going on? No, it's just another perspective, and he's recalling another detail. He says, I saw a man in a red car with brown hair hit another man on a bicycle. And the brown-haired man got out of the car and assaulted the victim, and the victim screamed and begged, and the brown-haired man uh, got out and kicked him. And the other man said, why are you kicking me? And the brown-haired man got in his car and he went down on south on 4th Street, right? He's telling the same story from his perspective with other details. Does not mean he's telling a lie or he's not telling the same story as everybody else. He is telling the same story. Now, look at witness number 5. Just some schmo wants to get on the news or something like that, and because that kind of thing happens, or you want somebody that wants to get involved in something or maybe produce something and get some notoriety. Number 5 says, I think I saw a red truck hit a woman pedestrian, and then he fled the scene. Well, red is the only thing. And somebody was struck, but the other details to it have no bearing to the rest of the narrative of what's going on. So we can deduce that witness number 5 is probably not an accurate witness. You follow what I'm saying? Okay. So now we've already prefaced this. We've talked about who Gamaliel is. Now I want to go back to the Archko volume and start there. Now this is so fascinating to me, and I hope this is to you as well. All right. Let's blow it up a little bit. All right. Gamaliel's interview with Joseph and Mary and others concerning Yeshua. The Hagiography, or the Holy Writings, found in St. Sophia Mosque in Constantinople, made by Gamaliel in the Talmuds of the Jews. So this is the reference to the Talmud, and this is most of it's going to be Sanhedrin. And by the way, this is not unlikely to happen. Wait a minute, where'd my page go? There we go. This is not unlikely thing. Is the mosque here, right? So there was a group in Ephesus, and when there became a mosque there, all these documents were taken over by the opposing force, even the Romans. That's how Rome ended up getting a lot of these things. These documents weren't just destroyed; they were taken because a lot of it had historical references and history in it. Okay, so these particular ones, which are in Constantinople, would have been in a mosque, but it would formerly have been a synagogue. Okay, all right, made by Gamaliel and the Talmuds and the Jews, 27b. So there's a reference there that we can locate. It seems Gamaliel was sent by the Sanhedrin to interrogate Joseph and Mary in regard to this child Yeshua, he says, right? So this is the preface to what we're about to read. Somebody else is writing that and telling us this is the actual text from Gamaliel. I found Joseph and Mary in the city of Mecca in the land of Ammon or Moab, but I did not find Yeshua. And when I went to the place where I was told he was somewhere else. And thus I followed him from place to place until I despaired of finding him at all. Whether he knew that I was in search of him and did it to elude me, I cannot tell, though I think it most likely the former was the reason. For his mother says he was bashful and shuns company. Joseph is a woodworkman, and he is very tall and ugly. His hair looks as though it might have been dark auburn when he was young. His eyes are gray and vicious, and he is anything but a prepossessing in his appearance, and he is gross and glum as he looks. But he is a poor talker, and it seems that yes and no are the depth of his mind. I am satisfied that he is very disagreeable to his family. His children look very much like him, and upon the whole, I should call them a third-rate family. I asked him who were his parents, and he said his father's name was Jacob, and his grandfather was Matthew. And he did not like to talk on the subject. He was very jealous. I told him that we had heard that he had had a vision, and I was sent to ascertain the facts in the case. And he said he did not call it a vision, he called it a dream. And he said after he and Mary had agreed to marry, it had seemed that something told him that Mary was with child, and he did not know whether he was asleep or awake, but he made it such an impression on him, on his mind, that he concluded to have nothing more to do with her. And while he was working one day under a shed, all at once a man in snowy white stood by his side and told him not to doubt the virtue of Mary, for she was holy before Yah, and that the child conceived was not by man, but by the Holy Spirit, and that the child would be free from human passions. In order to do this, he must, that is, his humanity must be of an exact of Alma. This is the Hebrew word for virgin, or one of the Hebrew words for virgin. It's not the only word. That he might endure all things and not resist and fill the demands of prophecy. He said the angel told him that the child should be great and should rule all the kingdoms of this world. And he said that the child would set up a new kingdom wherein should dwell righteousness and peace, and that the kingdoms of this world which should oppose him, God would utterly destroy. And I asked him, how could a virgin conceive of herself without the germination of a man? And he said, this is the work of God. He has brought to life the womb of Elizabeth, so that she had conceived and will bear a son in her old age, who will go before and tell the people of the coming of this king. And after telling me all these things, he disappeared like the melting down of the light. And then I went and told Mary what had occurred, and she had told me that the same angel, or one like him, had appeared to her and told her the same thing. So I married Mary, thinking that if what the angel had told us was true, it would be greatly to our advantage. But I'm fearful we are mistaken. Yeshua seems to take no interest in us, nor anything else much. I call him lazy and careless, and I do not think he will ever amount to much less a king. And if he does, he must do a great deal better than what he has been doing. And I asked him now, how long after that interview with the angel before the child was born? And he said he did not know, but he thought it was 7 or 8 months. And I asked him I asked him where they were at the time. And he said Bethlehem. The Roman commander had given orders for all the Jews to go on a certain day to be enrolled as taxpayers. And he and Mary went to Bethlehem as the nearest place of enrollment. And while they were there, this babe was born. I asked if any strange occurrence. I asked if anything strange occurred there that night, and he said that the people were much excited, but he was so tired that he had gone to sleep and saw nothing. And he said, toward the day there were several priests came to see them and the babe and gave them many presents. And the good news got circulated that this child was the king of the Jews, and it created such an excitement that he took the child and his mother and came to Moab for the protection, for fear the Romans would kill the child to keep it from being a rival to the Romans. And I discovered that all Joseph's ideals were of selfish kind, and all he thought of was himself. And Mary is altogether a different character, and she is too noble to be the wife of such a man. She seems to be about 40 or 45 years of age. And by the way, this is many years after Yeshua was born. This is after they come back from Egypt, you guys, and they're back in the land. So they came back when Yeshua was 12. Now some say that Yeshua was between 15 and 26 around this time that Gamaliel is doing this investigation, right? So it makes sense that Mary is at this time about 45 years of age, abounds with a cheerful and happy spirit, and is full of happy fancies. She is fair to see, rather fleshly, and has soft and innocent looking eyes, and it seems to be naturally a good woman. I asked her who her parents were, and she said her father's name was Eli, and her mother's name was Anna. Her grandmother's name was Peniel, a widow of the tribe of Asher, and of great renown. And I asked her if Yeshua was the son of Joseph, and she said he was not. And I asked her to relate the circumstances of the child's history. And she said that one day, while she was grinding some meal, there appeared at the door a stranger with shining raiment, which showed as a bright light. And she was very much alarmed by his presence and trembled like a leaf. But all her fears were calm when he spoke to her. For he said, Mary, thou art loved by Yah, and he has sent me to tell you, or to tell thee, that thou shalt have a child, and this child shall be great and rule in all nations of the earth. And she continued, I immediately thought of my engagement to Joseph and supposed that he was the way that the child was to come. But it astonished me more when he had told me that. But he astonished me more, even the more. Astonished me the more when he told me that that cousin Elizabeth had conceived and would bear a son whose name was to be John, and my son should be called Yeshua. And this caused me to remember Zacharias had seen a vision and disputed with the angel, and for that he was struck with dumbness, so that he could no longer hold the priest's office. And I asked the messenger if Joseph knew anything of the matter, and he said that he said that he had told Joseph that I was to have child, and by command of the Holy Spirit, and that he was to redeem his people from their sins, and he was to reign over the whole world, and every man should confess to him that he should rule over all the kings of the earth. And I asked her how she knew that he was an angel, and she said he told her so, and she knew he was an angel from the way he came and went. I asked her to describe how he went from her, and she said he had seemed to melt away like the extinguishing of a light. And I asked her if she knew anything about John the Baptist, and she said he lived in the mountains of Judea, the last she knew of him. And I asked her if he and Jesus were acquainted, or did they visit? And she said she did not think they knew each other. And I asked her at the time this angel, as called him, visited her, was she Alma, that is, a virgin? And she said she was, and that she had never showed to man, nor was known by any. And I asked her if she had that time maintained her fourchette, and after making her and Joseph understand what I meant, they both said that she had, and Joseph said this was the way that she had of testing her virtue, and I believe this we're talking about the hymen here. I asked if imagine that, being pregnant and you still have a hymen. I asked her if she knew when the conception took place, and she said she did not. And I asked if she was any pain in bearing or delivering this child, and she said none of any consequence. I asked her I asked her if he was healthy, to give me a description of his life, and she said he was perfectly healthy, and she had never heard him complain of any pain or dissatisfaction. His food always agreed with him, and he would eat anything set before him. And if anyone else complained, he would often say he thought it good enough, even much better than we deserved. And she said that Joseph was a little hard to please, but this boy had answered him so often, and his answers were so mild and yet so suitable that he had almost broken him of finding any fault. She said he settled all the disputes of the family, that no odds what was the subject or who it was, one word from him closed all mouths. And what gave him such power was the words were always unpretending and spoken as though they were not intended as a rebuke, but merely as a decision. I asked her if she had ever seen him angry or out of humor, and she said she had seen him apparently vexed and grieved at the disputes and follies of others, but never seen him angry. And I asked her if he had any worldly aspirations after money or wealth or a great name, or did he delight in fine dress like most youth? And she said that was one thing that vexed her, seemed to take no care of his person. He did not care whether he was dressed or not, or whether the family got along well or ill. It was all alike to him. She said he talked. She said she talked to him about his. Excuse me. She says she talked to him about it, and he would look at her with a little grief and say, "Woman, for such he has always called me. You do not know who I am." Indeed, she said, he takes so little interest in the things of the world and the great questions of the day. They were beginning to despair of his ever amounting to much, much less being a king, as the angel said he would be. If so, he would have to act very differently from what he has been acting at the time. I told her that the Jewish doctors contended that the amorous disposition is particular of the male, meaning they were trying to see if Yeshua had any if he liked any females. I asked her if she had ever seen in private life of Yeshua any signs of such disposition, and she said she had not. I asked her if she ever saw him in any particular fondness for a female society. She said she had not. If any, rather the contrary, that the young Bethul, the word in Hebrew for young women, were very fond of him and were always seeking his society, and yet it seemed to care nothing for them, and they appeared too fond of him, and he treated them with almost with scorn. He will often sit up and leave them and wander away and spend his time in meditation and in prayer. He is a perfect ascetic in his life. When I see how the people like to be with him and ask him questions and seem to take such delight with his answers, both men and women, it almost vexes me. They say there is a young woman in Bethany who he intends to marry. But unless he changes his course, very much will he never be qualified to have a family. I do not believe the reports. He never seems to me to care anything about women when he is in my presence. Thus it seems that Joseph and Mary have both lost all confidence in his becoming anything. They seem to think that the Sanhedrin should do something for putting to him to get out and let him show himself to the people. I tried to console them by telling them that my understanding of the prophecy was that he had to come to the high priesthood first, and there would be work in the spiritual dominion of the heart. And when he had brought about unity of the heart and oneness of aim, it would be easy enough to establish his political claim, and all who would not willingly submit to him. It would be an easy matter with the sword of Joshua or Gideon to bring under his control. It seemed to me that his parents' ideas are selfish in character, and they care nothing about the Jewish government nor the Roman oppression. All they think about is this self-exaltation and to be personally benefited by their son's greatness. But I told them they were mistaken, that the building up of the kingdom of heaven was not done to be done by might nor by power, but by the Spirit of Yah. And it would not do for us to use carnal weapons, nor to expect carnal pleasures to be derived therefrom. That it was not my understanding of the prophecy that this king was to use such weapons, either for himself or for the benefit of a party, but for the good of all men, that his dominion was to be universal and it was to be of a spiritual character, and that he was sent to the lost and not to the found. His parents told me of an old man who lived on the road to Bethany, who had once been a priest, a man of great learning and well skilled in the laws and prophets, and that Yeshua was often with him reading the law and the prophets together, and that his name was Massalian, and that I might find Yeshua there, but he was not there. Massalian said that he was often at Bethany with a young family, and he thought that there was some love affair between them and one of the girls. I asked him if he had ever seen anything like courtship between them, and he said he had not, but inferred from their intimacy and from their fondness of the woman's part, as well as the laws of nature, that such would be the case. I asked of him to give me an outline of the character of Yeshua, and he said he was a young man of the finest thought and feeling he had ever seen in his life, that he was the most apt in his answers and solutions to difficult problems of any man of his age he had ever seen. that his answers seem to give more universal satisfaction, so much that the oldest philosopher would not dispute with him, nor any manner join issue with him, or ask the second time. I asked Masalan, who taught him to read and interpret the law and the prophets. And he said this was, and he said that his mother said that he had always known how to read the law, and that his mind seemed to master it from the beginning. And into the laws of nature and the relation of a man to his fellow in his teachings or talks, he gives a deeper insight, inspiring mutual love and strengthening the common trust of society. Another plan of he has is of setting men right with the laws of nature. He turns nature into a great law book of illustrations showing that every bush is a flame, every rock a fountain of water, every star a pillar of fire, and every cloud the one that leads to God. And he makes all nature preach the doctrine of trust in the divine fatherhood. He speaks of the lilies as pledges of Yah's care, and points to the fowls as evidence of his watchfulness over human beings. Who can measure the distance between Yah and the flower of the field? What connection are those between man and the lily? Such illustrations he creates a similitude in man that seems to awe him into reverence, and he becomes attracted toward heavenly thought and feels that he is in the presence of one that is superior. In his talk, he brings to feel he is very near the presence of El. He says, how much more your Father? The plane is one, though the intermediate points are immeasurable distance. Thus, by beginning with the flower, he reasons upward to the absolute and then descends and teaches lessons of trust in the loving Father. The lessons of trust in God reassure the anxious listener and create an appetite that makes him long for more. And it often seems when he has brought his hearers to the highest point of anxiety, he suddenly breaks off and leaves his company as though he had cared nothing for them. Yeshua in his talks brings all these illustrations to make man feel his nearness to his kindred man, teaching also their relation and dependence upon God. And although his method is happy, it does not seem to me that it is the most successful. He teaches that man and the flowers and the birds drink from the same fountain and are fed from the same table. Yet at the same time, he seems to do everything to excite suspicion and prejudice. We that are watching him to see his divine mission commence, he is continually tantalizing our expectations, as well as mocking our natural reasons and desires. When a man separates himself from all other men, both in point of doctrine as well as discipline, he takes a very great risk on his part, especially when he confines God to one channel and that one of his own dictation. A man that assumes these assumes these responsible positions must have vast resources from which to draw, or he will sink in the whirlpool in which his own interpretance has created through Yeshua in his teachings or talks. His words sound so much like the teachings of Hillel or Shammai that I must call it teaching, though he has no special scholars. We learn that Yah is spirit and Yah is a father, and he says these are only two things that are essential for men to know. Then he illustrates this to the parents and asks them what they would do for their children. He was telling some mothers a circumstance of mother starving herself to feed her child, and then applied it to God as our Father. And then they commenced shouting and were so happy. And Jesus got up and left the house in seemingly disgust. Massalian says that he is tempted at times to become impatient with Yeshua as he devotes so much time to details. It seems almost a waste of time for a man who came to save the world to be lingering over a special case of disease. He thinks he could hasten Yeshua's physical deportment. Why not speak one word and remove every sick patient from his sick bed at the same hour? What a triumphant this would be. I asked him if Yeshua had healed anyone, and he said, not as yet. But if he is to be the King of the Jews, he was to heal all nations. And why not do it at once? If he would, there would be nothing more required to establish his kingdom. But I said to him, it is not equally so with Yah's creative power. See that the time and the labor that it takes to bring forth a grain of corn, why not have caused the earth to bring forth every month instead of every year? Christ was talking in defense of his Father. The people must learn to love and obey the Father before they would have reverence the Son. Yes, he said the God. Yes, he said that. I think that means that God and Yeshua represented was one that people might love to venerate. That he was a God of love, and no bloody designs to execute on a bad man, provided he ceased in his evil ways. It is to be noted that all of Yeshua's talk there are manifested references to the future. Many of his statements were like a sealed letter, not to be opened but by time. A grain of mustard was to result in a large tree. All his ideas refer to the future, like the parent helping a child with his burden of today by telling of a blessing of the morrow, and by making today the seed corn of tomorrow, and keeping the action of today under moral control by making the morrow or the day of judgment. He stated further that Yeshua was a young man who was the best judge of human nature that he had ever seen, and that he thought at times he could tell men their thoughts and expose their bad principles. And while he had all these advantages of life, he seemed not to care for them, nor to use them abusively. He seems to be like all men, one as well as another, so much that his own parents have become disgusted with him and have almost cast him off. But Yeshua has much a peculiar temperament that he seems not to care, and is and is as well satisfied with one as another. He said that Yeshua seemed to be fond of Mary and Martha, who lived in Bethany, and probably I might find him there. Masa Leon is a man of very deep thought and the most profound judgment. In all his life, he has made the scriptures his study. He too is a good judge of human nature, and he is satisfied that Yeshua is the Christ. And he said that Yeshua seemed to understand prophecy by intuition. I asked him where Yeshua was taught to read the prophecy. And he said that his mother had told him that Yeshua could read from the beginning, and that no one had ever taught him to read. And he said that he, in the making quotations from the prophet, was sometimes mistaking of his memory, because his memory had failed him. But Yeshua would correct him every time without the scroll, and that sometimes he thought Yeshua was certainly mistaken, but never in a single instance was he wrong. I asked him to describe his person to me so that I might know him if I should meet him. And he said, if you ever meet him, you will know him. While he is nothing but a man, there is something about him that distinguishes him from every other man. He is the picture of his mother, only he has not her smooth and round face. His hair is a little more golden than hers, though it is much from sunburn than anything else. He is tall, and his shoulders are a little drooped, and his visage is thin, and his swarthy complexion, though it's from exposure. His eyes are large and a soft blue, and rather dull and heavy. The lashes are long, and his eyebrows are large. His nose is that of a Jew. In fact, it reminds me of an old-fashioned Jew in every sense of the word. He is not a great talker unless there's something brought up about heaven and divine things, when his tongue moves glibly and his eyes light up with a particular brilliance. Though there is this peculiarity about Yeshua, he never argues a question. He never disputes. He will commence and state facts, and they are on such a solid basis that nobody will give the boldness to dispute him. Though he has such mastership of judgment, he takes no pride in confuting his opponents, but always seems to be sorry for them. I have seen him attacked by the scribes and doctors of the law, and they have seemed like children learning their lessons under a master. His strongest points are in the spiritual power of the law and the intentions of the prophets. The young people try to get him to take a class of them and teach them, but he utterly refused. This Jew is convinced that he is the Messiah of the world. I went there to Bethany, but Yeshua was not there. And they said that he and Lazarus were away, and they could not tell where. And I went and saw Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, and had a long talk with them. And they were very pleasant and nice young maids, and Mary is quite handsome. I teased her about Yeshua, but they both denied that Yeshua was anything like a lover. He was only a friend. And though this is so common for young maids, I did not know whether to believe them or not until I told them what my real business. And when I told them that this was the same person that was born of the Virgin in Bethlehem some 26 years before, and that his mother had told me that the facts in the case, they seemed deeply interested. And they then told me upon their honor that Yeshua never talked or even hinted to me either hinted to either one of them on the subject of marriage. Martha blushed and said she wished he had. If he was to be king, she would like to be queen. And I asked him if he had ever seen him in the company of young virgins, and they said they had not. I asked him if they had ever heard him talk about young girls, or if he thought of their society more than that of men, and they were both declared that he had not. And they were very much surprised that he did not. I asked them what he talked of when they're in their company, and they said he was not much for their company, and that he and their brother would go up on the housetop and stay there half the night, and sometimes all night, talking and arguing points of interest to them both. Mary said she had often gone near so she could listen to them, for she loved to hear him talk. He was so mild and unpretending, and then he was so intelligent that he was different from any and all other young men she had ever seen. I asked them what was their brother's opinion of them, and they said he thought there never was such a man on earth, and he thought to him to be one of God's prophets. And he said when they are out in the mountains, as they are most of the time, Yeshua can tell him about all the flowers and the trees and the rocks, and can tell him everything about the world, and that none of the wild animals are afraid of him. He says often that the stag and the wolf will come and stand for Yeshua to stroke their mane, and seem most loath to go away from him. He says that there are no poisonous serpent that will offer to hiss at him, and their brother thinks he is perfectly safe if Yeshua is with him. I asked them if he had ever told their brother anything about himself, and they said that if he had spoken to their brother, he had not told them. Now, masters of Israel, having investigated this matter, and after tracing Yeshua from his conception to the present time, and after obtaining all the information that is to be on this important subject, and getting it from those who are more likely to tell the truth from the fact that they are disinterested in persons, and then taking into prophetical as well as the historical view of the subject, I have come to the conclusion that this is the Christ that we are looking for. And as a reason of my conclusion, I will call your attention to the following facts. First, to the prophecy of Isaiah, section 7. So he's quoting where Mary is prophesied to be conceiving, right? And he said, "Here now saith Yah, O house of David, it is a small thing for you. Therefore Yah himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and ye shall call his name God with men," which is Emmanuel, butter and honey shall he eat, and he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that God abhors shall be forsaken of her king. Bind the testimony, seal the law among the disciples. Yah will hide his face from the house of Jacob, and he will look to him. And there is a literal fulfillment of this word of the Most High God, so clear and so plain that none may mistake. Jeremiah 31st section. Turn, O virgin, to thy people, for the hand of the Lord is upon thee. And for Yah shall create a new thing in the earth. A woman shall encompass a man. And here again is set forth the same thing that Isaiah speaks of, and the same thing that I have learned from Mary. Micah, section 5. Thou Bethlehem, Ephratah, thou art little among the thousands of Judah, and out of thee shall come forth unto me him that shall rule my people, and he is from everlasting, and I will give them up until the time she travailed to bring forth my first son, bring forth my firstborn, that he may rule all the people. And here we have the city of the virgin. The office is the manner of the life, and the seeking of him by the Sanhedrin. All these things are under our eyes, as full and complete as I know to write them. Who have all these testimony given in this letter? How can we as a people dispute these things? In the 49th section of Genesis, making reference to the history that is now upon us, the writer says, a captive shall not depart from Judah, nor the lawmaker from him until Shiloh come and gather his people under his feet forever. Now, this is in the Sanhedrin. This is in the Talmud. And that's why this book is called what it's called. Okay. So there would be copies. So not only would there be a copy of the original that Gamaliel wrote, because you remember, you guys, we don't have email. There's no internet in these times. And these scribes would be making a copy and then sending these copies to wherever they're going. So the original owner would have his letters, and then there would be a copy go to these different places where they're going to be archived. And the scribes there would make more copies, okay, to document this kind of stuff, to send to other synagogues. So everybody would be on board with the conclusion of Gamaliel's letter, okay? But this was like an internal thing, by the way, too. This was never meant to prove or disprove by the Bible. This is simply procedure under Jewish law. When, Yeshua is on the scene, there's been a buzz since his birth. He's now back from Egypt. He's 26 years old. He's getting ready to go into his ministry, and there's been an investigation to validate whether he is who people say he is. And then by the time he comes into Jerusalem, he interacts with the other characters that we're going to investigate, like Caiaphas and Nicodemus, Pilate, right? And we're going to see these interactions in these documents. And we're going to see differences in the writing style. In other words, we're going to see that these clearly are different authors that are writing from different perspectives, and from a perspective that only a Jew would know of. In other words, Pilate's not going to be quoting the Talmud, or, for that fact, the guys that put this book together were Christians. And its chances are, not having the internet and having access to the Talmud at the time, and having reference to that, other than going to a library, right? They would have a limited time. We can fact check these things now because we have the internet. In these times, these men, this effort, and I wish there would have been other documents from the Talmud, particularly the day that Yeshua was crucified. I would have liked to seen the account from that particular day, and I do believe that is in Sanhedrin 39b or something like that. It's not included in here. Now that's peculiar to me, because I don't know the rhyme or reason why they chose the documents that they chose to put in here. I do know that in their story that there was a treasure trove at the Vatican and in Constantinople of many, many thousands and thousands of just random documents that are not necessarily religious text, but a lot of it is correspondence and historical things, right? The writings of Josephus and things like that. So they had access to all these, which would have been a typical library, right? To preserve, right? So maybe there was limited time, they couldn't get to it. I don't know. It didn't appear here, but we can make reference to that and many other references to Yeshua and his crucifixion and his ministry in the Talmud. So again, at some point, I'm going to get with my rabbi friend and try to extract all those, and we will update this particular series with what I can pull from the Talmud. The best I can do in this study that we're going to do is see, my nose is itching from my mustache, is see the references from the Talmud. Now we can see the reference number and all that, but I got to tell you that system, I don't know how it works. And so I don't know how to go online and figure out where these books are, because they're different volumes and they're called different things, right? So the next one that we're going to do in the next video is going to be of Caiaphas. Now this is a really interesting one because both of these men, we can see historical records of them. We can even see some of their writings. It's not a dispute. It's not like it's disputed religious text. It is what it is. And the Jews don't really care one way or another. Gamaliel was just one voice. He did write favorably. And it was even called, let me just show you this. He was even called, and the ecclesiastical tradition claims that Gamaliel had embraced the Christian faith and was tolerant toward early Christians, as explained by this according to It gives some information here. I meant to read this earlier, and I didn't. The Eastern Orthodox Church venerates Gamaliel as a saint, and he is commemorated on a certain day. Now, is there credence to that? I believe so. Can you imagine all that we know from the Bible and from the New Testament about the crucifixion and resurrection? And we're going to see something really interesting by the time we get to Pilate's, because, and this goes to why I believe it's legit, because there's subtle details in there that I believe that if a person in the 1800s was truly going to forge something, these details are so minute and so yet so important that whoever forged, if it was a forge, had to have extraordinary knowledge about littlest details of Judaism to add some of the details in there that they did, right? So you can tell by the style and the level of knowledge and the references of that document that it had to be written by somebody that was a Jew, or right? Or and I'm talking about what you see in the letters of Gamaliel and in Caiaphas, because both make references to the Talmud. Right, and they talk in a language that only a Jew would. The same thing with Caesar, with Pilate's letter. The language there is different than you see with Gamaliel or with Caiaphas. Very interesting and very fascinating. So, you guys, I'm sorry for a really, really long. This is going to be the longest one because we had to do a preface of what we're going to be talking about and why it's important. Right, and can we test these testimonies? Can we weed through the details of each of this and extract what is true and what is not true, or if any of it's true? Is it all just a lie? Well, that's what we're here to do. So in this series, we're going to go through. I want you guys to comment down below, and we're going to take a poll, and we're going to see what you think about it, what your thoughts of these texts are. Are they just a bunch of garbage? Does it bring credence to what we know from the Bible? You let me know. And the further we get into this, I think the more interesting it gets, because like I said, the exact day that Yeshua was born is mentioned in one of these documents, and also the exact day. Now we know what the Gospels say about his crucifixion, but there is a Roman account of that exact day. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I will tell you that it was a full moon, which is really important if you know your calendar. There's a confirmation in that text that tells us it wasn't indeed a full moon. That's important because Passover happens on a full moon and no other time. All right? So that's what I got for you guys. I appreciate you watching and sharing. Please subscribe. And if you're able to, please help with a donation. We're getting in a time where things are very tight right now, and I'm having to tighten my belt and make the budget is tight, you guys. And I still got to travel to Hawaii again at the end of January. I got another court date, January 31st, and I got to make it there. And so I am trying to survive and trying to save at the same time. And we're coming into this season, Hanukkah season, and it's quite, I wouldn't say difficult, but it's makes me nervous to be so low in my budget. So thank you for thinking about me. Thank you for praying for this channel and this ministry. And I appreciate your views and your support. May Yahuwah bless you. I think this is going to be a really good series for you to learn something here. We still got several more documents to go through, and they get better and better, you guys. Shalom to you. May Yah bless you.